Hey guys, welcome to the Smart Venture Podcast. In each episode, we're going to have conversations with some of the top investors, superstar founders, as well as well-known tech company executives in Silicon Valley. We'll have a coffee chat with them to learn their way of thinking and actionable tips on how they build or invest in a successful company. Before we start our show today, I want to make sure the listener, aka you, understand that everything a person say on the podcast only reflects hers or his own opinion, not the show or the company they work at. Today, our guest is the founding partner of Polaris Partners. He is the Emeritus Chairman of the NVCA, National Venture Capital Association. He sits on the board of MIT's Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research and the Arthur Rex Center for Entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. He was featured on the Forbes Midas List, as well as my book, How to Be a VC. His name is Thayer McGuire. In the last episode, we started the first part of the conversation with Terry. We talked about how Terry got into VC, how he started his fund Polaris Partners, and how he stays competitive and builds strong relationships within the industry. In this episode, we'll focus on the actions Terry took to build strong relationships and his management philosophy and strategies for his fund. Please enjoy. I really like that you mentioned picking the right people first and let them pick the right investment. As someone not knowing much of a particular sector, how should I pick the right people? Also, since the people you pick are industry experts, why couldn't they invest in companies themselves? How do you convince them to work with your firm?
Often it's described as that academics have a distrust for commercial people because they're afraid they're going to corrupt their science. And so there's often this concern, reticence on the part of the academic entrepreneur to get involved with commercial people and more specifically venture capital. I think the answer is the past relationships, which is, if someone is concerned that we're going to treat them poorly because we're the venture guys, we ask them to call people we've backed in the past to see how we perform. And there's two parts of the answer that they'll get, which is one, Polaris, Thayer McGuire is a good partner to have. But two, as importantly, which is, without the capital that venture capital brings to the equation, your research is never going to see the light of day. It's never going to have an impact. You have to find a commercialization strategy if you're going to truly touch lives, not just have good research papers. And so, but it's a delicate dance, and it's a courtship of sorts. And so we work hard at that courtship. And so we try to spend as much time as we can with the academic entrepreneur to tell them why we're excited by the technology and what we think we could bring to the table. And then at the same time, we try to introduce them to people we work with in the past who will sort of give them some comfort that we're good to work with.
So what are some actions do you take to cultivate these relationships and build trust early on in your career before having any track records?
I think it's looking at deals, but it's also just getting to know the person. And it's hard to do, by the way, because everyone's so busy these days. You're not going to spend a lot of time to get to know you. But I think it's as much about that interpersonal dynamic and trust, and demonstrating moments when you had the advantage, but you didn't take advantage, even though you had the advantage.
Right.
And having it go both ways. And I also think researchers are working hard to transform the world, and so finding a mechanism by which they can transform the world makes a difference. And so, as far as you and I've had this conversation, how do you get to know venture capitalists well? And one of the lovely things about venture capital, one of the challenges is that we're all too busy for our own good, and there's, we're putting multiple balls in the air all the time, and so we're always parallel processing, and so trying to find a way to get to know people to stop and pay attention is hard to do. But I do think it's just a consistency and just being there and knowing what the person's interested in. It doesn't have to be a business plan. It could be an interesting researcher. It could be someone who you think that it could be if they have a passion for golf. It could be a great golfer. It's just some way of sort of saying, hey, Jim, I know you're Ace too. I know you, and I know what you like is this. And here's a great researcher who's working on it, or here's someone who's doing something that you might find cool. And I think just, again, developing this personal relationship, I think makes all the difference.
Totally. Nowadays, most people are trying to achieve a certain level of success in a short amount of time. But I like what you said about taking the time to build long-term relationships that can go a long way. One thing you're an expert in is commercialized scientific researches. Can you walk us through a particular company you've invested in and how did you transform it? What are some challenges do you face in the process?
Well, let me go back to some of the earliest ones, because I think they're sort of also telling us some of these questions about relationships. And Bob and I were involved with a gentleman named David Edwards, who was a researcher at Harvard, was at Harvard at the time, although I had been in Bob's lab. And David was doing some really interesting stuff with pulmonary drug delivery. And so at the time, David was, in fact, this was before he was at Harvard, he was at Penn State. And Bob had called me to sort of talk about this opportunity of bringing this technology out. And so I met David. I got excited by the idea of working with David and Bob. And then with David and Bob began negotiating the license out of MIT, because the technology came out of MIT. We put in about just seed capital really to get it going. And the more work that I did on it, the more excited I got. And so we quickly set up the company with our capital. There was no other venture capital involved. It was just Polaris money. And then because of the nature of the relationships that Bob and David had, we quickly got some corporate interest. And so we negotiated deals with 3 pharmaceutical companies to license the technology. And then, which were all in the middle. None of them had reached results yet, but by that time the platform was well established, and so the company was then acquired by Akamai. And so that happened all within 18 months. It was just a fairly short period of time, but it was this idea, which is Bob had called to sort of say, "There's an idea. There's a researcher that we should work with together. There's technology at MIT. Help us license that in. Help us build the team." The team was relatively small when we sold it. It was about 20 people, but it turned out to be the basis of some really interesting products, and so. That's and it was 1,000% return or whatever the IRR was. It was dramatic, but just a good example of how these partnerships got formed and how we worked well together.
Yeah, that's a great story. So essentially, you find a good partner early on. They would pick the industry expert for you. Since the experts are really reputable in a specific category of research, it's easy to attract capital in that category. So when you were working with Bob, what were some challenges you had to face during this process to commercialize scientific research?
Well, I think the maybe not specific to Bob, but generally, which is if, we've done a lot of academic research, and oftentimes we're looking for platform ideas, so it's not a single application.
Right.
And it's funny enough, oftentimes the most challenging part of that investing is identifying the first significant application, the killer app. And so I think that's often been the challenge. In the case of air, there were a bunch of respiratory diseases you could target. There were other diseases that were systemic diseases that could be targeted through the lungs. And so figuring out which is the first way you want to go, you can often, again, it sounds like it's a good problem to have, which you have multiple ways to go, but it can be challenging. And just trying to figure out that killer app is probably the hardest part. And then getting traction. And then once you've identified the killer app, the challenge is then you become known as a single idea around the killer app, and you want to maintain this platform concept. And so how do you focus on one thing without becoming known as only that thing? So it's sort of how do you tell the story around the technology is an important challenge.
As an expert in healthcare investing, what do you see as the next great investment opportunity?
There's a bunch of different opportunities. One is, I think, generally mental health is an opportunity space. And so I think people have been working on it, whether it be through the service dimension or whether it be through actually developing drugs. The whole neurodegeneration area is an important space. And so there's, 10 years ago, people were avoiding investing in the neuro space. Today, there's a lot of capital that's going after it because it's a big opportunity. I think some of these platform technologies, including the gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9, are going to lead to a series of interesting opportunities. I think the transformation of healthcare delivery itself is going to be an opportunity. We have a company called Iora, which is focusing on primary care and how you change that model to make it more appropriate. And I think that's going to be a successful company, but also it's going to be a successful area. So, the simple fact of the matter is healthcare is not a solved problem. There's new problems every day. There's, the more we solve, the more we discover that there's other things that we need to do. And so it'll be a never ending both challenge and opportunity to sort of serve the healthcare space. And so, but I think and the one thing that I'm always concerned about is that this one thing gets too much capital. So, for example, the whole immune oncology space has gotten a lot of capital. There's been a real flight for immune oncology. It's important. Cancer is a very important disease and its various manifestations to treat. But there's almost too much a single focused effort by the venture community on immune oncology. And so it's coming at it with a diverse approach, I think, is the best way to do it, which is what we've been doing.
Yeah, healthcare space is really broad. How do you develop your own thesis or investment strategy in the healthcare investing space?
Yeah. When I first started, again, it was a long time ago, there weren't that many deals in the healthcare space. And so we looked at everything. And through the years, we learned that what we were reasonably good at and what we weren't so good at. And so it's like everything else in life. When you're good at something, you continue to pursue it, you get better.
Yeah.
When you're not very good at something, you stop doing it and you get worse. And so, if you look at our strategy now, there's a lot of biotechnology in our strategy. We've done well in biotechnology. There are big markets. There are big needs. There's revolutionizing technology that's coming along. There's great entrepreneurs that we can back. There's great academics, researchers. And so it's a very full opportunity set. As a firm, we've backed a little bit away from devices, at least at the early stage. As for us, we found that to be a hard place to make money. I think we've invested in some great device companies, but we've only invested in them later when they've already probably gotten approval from the product or near approval. Although I tell the story, when I joined the business, you have to be careful of dogma. When I joined the business, there's sort of three rules, which is don't invest in central nervous system, sort of neuro, don't invest in diagnostics, and don't invest in cancer. And the darlings have been cancer and neuro, they've become the darlings. So if you stuck with the dogma, there's stuff that you would never do. And it would have been a big mistake not to do it. So you always have to be aware of putting on too many rules. But I think we've always just tried to go to what we know best. And again, the better you are at something, the more you're likely to see stuff from people in that space. And so we've allowed it to sort of evolve that way.
Looking at the most recent portfolios, I saw some really interesting companies. For example, Drizzly, which is a company doing alcohol delivery, and Naked Puppy, which is a cosmetic company. So curious, what is the investment strategy for Polaris to succeed in the next generation?
So when we started the firm, we were diversified. I've been talking about life science because I do life sciences, and I've been making a very personal discussion here. But the firm itself had, of the three founding partners, two of them did technology and consumer, and I did life science. And so as a firm, we've continued to maintain that diversity. And their history has proved there's some great firms, and again, like Benrock and Greylock and others, which have a history of coming from a diversified background. Some have shifted to a focused strategy. Some have maintained their diversity. We've decided to maintain that diversity, but if you look at our more recent funds, we have things like Drizzly and others, and there always tends to be a technology enablement component to it. So it isn't just a pure consumer play, but Drizzly obviously is using e-commerce as a channel for selling alcohol online, so it's sort of, again, trying to maintain this diversity because from an investing perspective, diversity is a good thing. Maintaining expertise within the partnership, but not going so far afield that when partners come together, they don't understand each other's world. And over the last 25 years, we've been able to do that.
Speak of fund management, what is your managing style and what's your day-to-day like?
Yeah. Well, let me also talk about the evolution of Polaris because while I'm a founder and was a managing partner, I'm now a founding partner. And so there's a group of 4 managing partners that are there now. And in fact, I've often said my most important deal in a world of deals is Polaris itself that makes sure that it's successful. And so I'm really proud of my partners that are now managing partner. Miriam Dave, Amy, and Brian, and along with Bryce. I think that my style when I was managing the firm was really I gave people a lot of rope. I let them pursue their passion, but try to interact with them at critical moments, and be there to provide advice and sort of look at a lot of the deals. And so there wasn't this sort of abandonment. It wasn't like, go bring a deal back and we'll decide whether it's good or not. It really is trying to work with them on those deals. And oftentimes, again, with this network concept, which is we would introduce them to people that we like to work with. And so when Amir joined us, for example, he came out of Bob's lab. And so that was a very easy relationship to have. And so, but our style has always been to work pretty hands-on with people that are coming into the partnership, whether they be coming from sort of an academic background or a commercial background. Work closely with them, share ideas, and try to become as partnerly as possible as quickly as we can. And I've often said, which is particularly for young partners, if a deal doesn't work out, it's my fault. But if a deal does work out, it's your
credit.
Yeah.
In terms of building a successful fund, do you think everyone on the investment team should all work together, or do you believe in promoting each individual on the team to be a superstar in a specific category would be better for the fund?
I think the best way is to have people work together and to be as much a consensus organization where people, and I've often said that even though I'm a senior partner and a founder, I want everyone to sort of critically look at my companies and give me feedback. And if they don't like it, let me know why they don't like it. I'd rather know before we cut a check by one of my partners doesn't like a deal. So, so this idea of consensus, let's all work together, let's get to know each other. I think one of the challenges of bigger firms, and ours is now a bigger firm, is that I can't know every single company in the portfolio. It's near impossible to do that to the level that I would like to. And so I think this ability to be a consensus partner becomes more challenging as you get to be bigger and bigger firms. But I think that there's power in numbers, there's power in partnership and in true partnerships. And I think the firms where you have sort of the lone wolves that come in and bring their own deals can work, and it's some styles that work for some firms, but our style is very much, which is bring it together, let's work on it together. Let's figure out whether we do it all together and use your partners as good sounding boards as you make a decision to pursue a deal.
Since Polaris already had good track records and a great brand, there must be a lot of deals coming to you. Where do you draw the line? What are some areas you think would not have a good investment outcome?
I think because we found success in certain models, we go back to those models. And so there's a bias for doing those types of investment, whether it be platform technologies or whether it be enabling technologies. We tend to invest early on in a company's life. And so I think it's not so much of what we decide not to do. It's really what we decide to do. And there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so many partners. There's only so much capital to put to work. And so I think the reason to shift away from your strategy is because you're not finding good opportunities in your existing strategy. But at the moment, we've found good opportunities in our existing strategy. So we as they say, stick to our knitting and continue to do the same thing. I think in the past, we've seen the industry, though, go through periods where there was a hot topic. For example, telecom was very hot back in the 90s and then sort of dramatically fell out of favor. And so clean technology was hot for a while and then it sort of fell out of favor. And I think what we've done is we've always because we're a diversified fund, we've always maintained the ability to do one or two of those investments within a fund of 20 or 30 companies to give it a try and see if we can learn that it's a space that we like. And if it's a space that we like, we continue to pursue it. And if it's a space that we don't like, we just pull back from it. So it's a little bit evolutionary as opposed to revolutionary. And probably the biggest risk in the business is using as I said before, using old rules, the dogma in the past, which is irrelevant to the moment, and sort of saying, I'm never going to do X. Well, never is a long time, and you should always reconsider stuff along the way. It may be the perfect time to be doing a new idea. So leaving enough room in a partnership to wander over and try something new.
Totally. We're at our last section of the podcast where we ask 3 questions on personal development. who would you invite to your dinner party? What is a good book that you recommend us to read? Who made the biggest impact in your career?
It's like picking children. It's kind of hard to do. I've been blessed with so many wonderful relationships, but not to sound as you might expect me. The most important people in my life are my family. Mm-hmm. So they've had the biggest impact on me. My wife's had an enormous impact on me. She's been my best partner through the years, and she's enabled me to do things I never imagined I could do before. So that's clear. My family has been important. My mom and dad, as I said, were always very encouraging, and my mom was an entrepreneur, and so I got a sense of entrepreneurship, both the opportunities and the challenge of entrepreneurship early. Being around people like Bob and Tillman and Kari and Phil and Paul and David and the name Omid, and the name goes on. I'd invite any one of them to dinner at any time, and I'm sure we'd have a very meaningful dinner. And then finally, but as importantly, my business partner through my life has been John Flint, and he's been an extraordinary partner. And then having the ability to bring in Amir and Dave and Brian and Bryce and Amy as now managing partners, they're all important too. So it's really hard to sort of say who's the one person. I'd invite them all to dinner, and we'd have a wonderful dinner. I should have a single book in mind, and I don't. I like reading this. I tend to like reading the business journals and as well as the scientific, whether it be Science or Nature. I think the ability to sort of comb through some of those publications on a regular basis to look at where the great science is coming from, who's doing it, I think have an impact. I'm not sure that's right for a 12-year-old, but it's something that the older I got, the more I liked reading it. So it may sound nerdy, but that's the truth.
What is one piece of advice you would give people who wants to get into healthcare investing or found a company in the space?
Well, I'll go back to where I started, which is about network, who you get to know. And I would identify my favorite entrepreneur and try to find a way to get to know her or him. And if you can't directly get to know them, try to find people that are around them. And because I think they're the real treasures. I think, we don't back technologies, we don't back companies, we back people. And so I think getting access to some of the best entrepreneurs is the way that I would go about doing it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you're taking the time chatting with us today.
Absolutely, Grace. Well, thank you.
That's all we have for today. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smart Venture Podcast. If you like it, please hit subscribe so you don't miss any tips from the experts. If you want to see more behind the scene, please go to smartventurepod.com. If you want to connect with me, all my socials are at Grace Gong GG. Besides on LinkedIn, it's just Grace Gong. Looking forward to see you at the next episode.